So what is the theme of your performance task? It's actually going to be poetry. So we are going to do some activities to get you ready to think about this topic. So the first thing I'd like you to do right now, giving you a chance to talk to someone sitting next to you, how do we know when we're reading poetry? So talk to each other. Take about a minute. How do you know it's poetry when you're looking at it? So how do we know when we're reading poetry? Daniel.
The only way you can is if it's in a kind of stanza form, where it like cuts off in the middle of the sentence and starts a new line.
Okay, well, that's not the only way, but that is one recognizable trait of poetry. Oh, are you here to, okay, just come on in. Come on in. Just have a seat. Yeah, so, and as I've just reminded everyone else, phones have to be 100% away right now because of the Smarter Balance lesson that we're in. So, yeah, it's, when you are looking at poetry, you will see things like stanzas and maybe a little bit of a different structure. Is that how poetry always is? Not always. What are some other things you notice? What other traits do you see when you're looking at poetry? And it doesn't have to be every single time, but what are some commonalities? Huh? Meter. Yeah, and how would you explain what that is?
It's like how many syllables are in each sentence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like maybe even a little bit of, yeah, you'll see some consistency in the syllables. Okay? Huh?
Unless it's an epic or haiku or anything else.
Thank you. All right. Anything else that you notice? Mason, what do you, what did you guys talk about? How do you know it's poetry? Okay, there might be alliteration.
Unless it's a haiku or unless it's
Oh, Daniel. Oh, Daniel. These are things that you could see. So let's just, okay, well, that's, you gotta be a little bit more open-minded with this. All right, anything else? Did anyone say anything about rhyming? Sometimes you see rhyming, thank you. All right, yeah, you might see some type of rhythm to a poem, but poems are a little bit different than prose. What's prose? Do you guys know what prose is?
Yeah.
What's prose?
Everything but poetry.
Everything but poetry. Yeah. So basically, poetry is different from prose. Prose is basically your written or spoken language in its ordinary or everyday form. So I've got two examples of writing on the next screen. I'm going to read each one to you, and I want you to decide which one's the poem and which one's prose. So the first one, the first example, rain on the face of the sea, rain on the sodden land, and the window pane is blurred with rain as I watch it pen in hand. Mist on the face of the sea, mist on the sodden land, filling the valves as daylight fails and blotting the desolate sand. So that's the first example. Your second example, when warm rain falls through cooler air, water evaporates from the warm rain. It subsequently condenses in the cool air, forming fog. Such fog can be quite dense. It generally will persist as long as the rain continues. Since temperature rises little during the day, there is little diurnal variation in rain-induced fog. Improvement in visibility cannot be expected until the rain stops or moves out of the affected area. So, just by show of finger, if you think example 1 is the poem, put up a 1. If you think it's example 2, I need you to be serious. You should only be putting up a 1 or a 2 right now. Thank you. Good. Yeah. Example 1 is your poem. So, how is it different? How are the two pieces of writing different? You've got both describe the weather, although one does it in verse, arranged in a rhythm, whereas the other one is your prose. It's your spoken or written language, and it's in more of an everyday form. Purpose, point of view, imagery, and form. And then you need to leave space where you can take some notes on example 1 and take some notes on example 2. I want you to do a comparison between the two pieces of writing. So, recreate this chart on that sheet of notebook paper. And again, you only need one per group right now. One per group. So what I'm going to ask you to do, I'm going to reproject example 1 and example 2. This time I'll give credit to the authors that wrote each of the examples. The first time I didn't, because that would have given away the poem versus the prose, even though you all knew the difference. But what I'd like you to do is when I reproject the two pieces of writing, I want you in your groups to talk about what is the purpose of each piece. What do you think the author's purpose was when they created that writing piece? What is the point of view that it's being expressed in? What images or imagery is being presented in the two pieces of writing? And then finally, what form is it taking? This really should go fairly quickly. You don't have to go super in depth, but you should have something written in each of the categories for each of the examples. So I'm going to reproject those examples, one being the poem. It's actually Rudyard Kipling. And then the second example actually came from the National Weather Service, and it's their definition of rain-induced fog. So I want you in your little groups right now to do a side-by-side comparison of those four different writing elements. And you're going to share out in about 5 minutes. So you've got about 5 minutes to do this. Go. Purpose. So what is the purpose of the first example? Purpose of the first example. Okay, looks like I just get to call on people. What's the purpose, Santiago, of the first one?
The purpose of the first one is to describe how rain falls on the land.
Yeah.
And what it does to the land.
Yeah, it's describing
Yeah.
what's happening. Yeah. What's the second one? What's the purpose of the second one?
The second one describes how rain-induced fog works.
Yeah, it's more of a definition versus a description, right? Okay, good. What about when it comes to point of view? So, Evan, what's the point of view of the first example?
The author.
Yes, okay, so it's a first person, almost narrative point of view, right? What about the second one? Yeah.
I don't know, like the National Weather Service.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and what are they doing? Is it a first person perspective? No. No, it's not. So it's written more in like a third person informative piece rather than a narrator explaining what's happening. What about imagery? What imagery do we see in the first example? Let's go. I don't know who wants to speak.
We say it paints a gloomy picture with images of the ocean because, like, thinking about like someone looking out of a window that's like covered in rain is kind of gloomy and like solemn.
Yeah, yeah. Is there any imagery in the second one?
Rain and fog.
Yeah, but is it producing that image for you, or are you just thinking it because of the way it's being described?
Fine, just the way it's being described is really clearly just the poem.
Good. Now, what about this last one in the form? So let's go this group over here. What's the form of the first example?
It's a poetry setting with stanzas and mythology, similar with them with the castles or
Yeah. So it's broken up into stanzas. It's kind of got this lines and stanzas with a rhythm to it. What about the second one?
It's just direct prose with common type text.
Good. Yeah. So check your work. Yeah, that first one describes the scene. The purpose of the second one was to provide information. Point of view, first person narration versus no real narrator. It's just objectively presented. You had the imagery presented, specifically like window pane blurred with rain. In the first example, The second one, no real specific images are given, but it evokes an image through its description. And then finally, you have the lines and stanzas in the first example versus the form of paragraph in the second one. So now here's your challenge. Using the National Weather Service's description of rain-induced fog as a team, you're going to get 5 minutes to do this. I found yesterday people were able to be done in 3. You're going to write 2 to 4 lines of poetry. As a team, you don't have to do this individually. As a team, write 2 to 4 lines and use some of the ideas. Think about purpose, point of view, imagery, form.